Hello, everybody, and welcome to a special Draft Week edition of Off Your Gord. I'm your host, Jeffrey Gordon. We've got a special episode, a little short impromptu episode here today. We're going to be talking about some quarterbacks, my favorite position on the field to evaluate. I'm a big quarterbacks guy. I always have been. I always will be. It's my favorite position. It's the one that I'm the most knowledgeable about on the football field. And in the past, I've done some quarterback evaluations. I've been really right about some guys like Justin Herbert and Patrick Mahomes, and I've been really, really wrong about some guys in the past as well, like Josh Rosen and Zach Wilson. So, we're about roughly 500 here. There's quarterbacks in this draft that I really like coming up. By the time you're seeing this, the draft may have already passed, but as it currently is right now, it is Wednesday, April the 23rd, so the draft is tomorrow, or at least it starts tomorrow. You've got the first round picks 1 through 32, and we're going to see some quarterback-needy teams picking quarterbacks. This year's draft, I think it's been no secret that it's kind of a weaker quarterback draft than years past. Last year, you saw Jaden Daniels, you saw Bo Nix, you saw Caleb Williams have a solid rookie season. I know a lot of people don't want to give him credit for it, but he was solid last year. You saw 3 other quarterbacks with McCarthy, Penix, and who was it? It was McCarthy, Penix. Oh yeah, and Drake May. And you saw 6 quarterbacks go in the first round last year. 4 of them really, really impressed, and then 2, one's kind of sat for a while and then started towards the end of the year. The other, J.J. McCarthy, missed his entire rookie season, but will be the Vikings starter this year. This year is nothing like that. You've got 2 quarterbacks that are pretty solidly going to go in the first round, and then after that, it gets kind of dicey. We may see more quarterbacks after that go in the first round, but it's not a guarantee. And I've got 10 quarterbacks here that I want to talk about today. Just kind of going to go through them, give my thoughts on them, give us some things I like about each of them, give some things I don't like about each of them. And without further ado, let's get right into it. Starting off, the clear consensus number 1 pick for the Titans, it seems like that a lot of people are pretty solidly like this guy's going first overall. The Titans need a quarterback. You can't trot out Will Levis back-to-back years and expect to win football games like that. So I think the Titans at number 1 draft Cam Ward for Miami. I've made that my mock draft. I've felt pretty solid about that. So Cam Ward, Miami, is the first quarterback I want to talk about here. He's definitely a playmaker. That this modern kind of NFL prototype. You got your Caleb Williams, your Patrick Mahomeses of the world. He can make plays with his legs, but he doesn't fully rely on his legs. He's a little reckless in a good way. At Miami last year, they had one of the most prolific offenses in college football. You saw a lot of times where he would kind of, just scramble around getting his guys time to get open. Him and Xavier Restrepo had that great rapport last year where, Ward would just kind of make something happen and say, screw it, Restrepo's down there somewhere, as, the meme would go, and Restrepo would be open. So Ward, he can be a bit reckless in that regard. And I think in the NFL, he's going to need to fine-tune that a little bit, but, definitely don't lose it because he's a very special playmaker. He's a great leader. We saw that in every destination he's been at in college, whether it was Miami or not. He's been just a great leader, great locker room guy. I don't expect any of that to change in Tennessee. And I expect the Titans to draft him first overall. He's got a great arm. He's the projected number 1 quarterback on the board, number 1 pick. There's not a lot to hate, just, a little bit of the recklessness. I would hope that he fine-tunes a little bit in college, or in the NFL from college. The next quarterback I want to talk about is a very polarizing figure among college football fans, among analysts, among everybody, it seems like. It's Shedeur Sanders from Colorado. I have him currently going number 9 to the New Orleans Saints. They're in need of a quarterback, and I think he'd be a good fit there. There's a lot I like about Shedeur. He's very accurate. He throws easily, in my opinion, the prettiest football in the draft. He can hit guys on pretty much any part of the field, and he did last year with Travis Hunter and LeJohntay Webster and all of his other weapons that he had in his arsenal. So he's one of the more accurate passers in the draft. He throws a great spiral. He had a really high completion percentage. I want to say it was 74%, staggering 74% last year. So a lot of that you really, really like. He's very accurate, and and just can get the football out on time and make plays like that. Unfortunately, and I think this is a little bit weird of a thing considering the super athlete that Deion Sanders, his father, used to be, but he's not that mobile. He's not very fast. He can get out of the pocket and maybe scramble for a first down here and there, but, just considering how ridiculously fast his dad was, one of the fastest NFL players in history, you'd think that some of that mobility would have translated, but it's not really part of Shadour's game. I liken his kind of running ability to sort of like a Jared Goff of sorts. He can definitely make plays, very sneaky, able to make plays like that, but you're not going to see him very often. That's not what you're drafting him for. And unfortunately, and NFL analysts have been saying this in recent days leading up to the draft, anonymously, of course, because, none of these analysts ever want to actually put their names on things. But I've shared a lot of these sentiments that he's just not a very good leader. When things are going well and Colorado is cooking and they're winning games, he's bright-eyed, he's in the media, he's talking about how great the team's doing, but when things go bad, it's always on somebody else. He famously last season kind of drug his offensive lineman through the mud, and I'm sure that turned off a lot of scouts in picking him. And just when things start to not go well for Colorado, he just gets kind of mopey on the sidelines, and you really don't want to see that from your young quarterback. But I think that that's something that can at least be worked on. Some things, when it comes to these quarterbacks, just can't be worked on. It's whether it's mechanics, whether it's things like that. That's just that's what you have. But with Shador, his leadership and his body language can definitely be worked on, and I trust that. With the work ethic that his father put in over his career and that he instills in his sons and his players, such as Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders, I trust that Shedeur is going to do what he needs to do in that regard. Third quarterback I want to talk about, one of my favorites in this draft. I've loved this guy for quite some time now, and I'm very excited to watch his career progress. Jackson Dart out of Ole Miss. In my mock draft, I currently have him going number 21 to my Pittsburgh Steelers. So I would love to have this kid, obviously. He's, he had a great season last year with Ole Miss. And having a great season in the SEC is no small feat. That's the toughest division in college football, I would say. I say that as a big fan of the Big Ten. I would say that the SEC is the toughest division to play in college football. But Jackson Dart had a great season there last year. He's got a big arm. Not quite as big as Cam Ward's, but he's got a really big arm. He can zip it in there. He's mobile, very mobile, maybe even a little more mobile than Cam Ward. He's really good at making plays with his legs. He's got kind of that almost like Johnny Manziel quality to him. Not, of course, the Johnny Manziel that we saw in the NFL, but the Johnny Manziel that we saw at Texas A&M. He can really just scramble. It's just, when it comes to watching Jackson Dart tape, you just grab a bucket of popcorn and get ready to be entertained, because you're going to see that. He's a prolific passer. I want to say he led the SEC in touchdowns last year. If not, he came damn near close to it. And so that was impressive. On a team like Ole Miss, where, they're not like Alabama or Georgia or even Texas at this point, where they're, consistently contending. Last year they were contenders. But that leads me to my next point. They did kind of fall apart at the end of the season, and you got to put some of that on Dart himself. He's just somewhat inconsistent. He'll have games where he'll throw 500 touchdowns, 300 yards, and he'll light up the field. And we saw him do that numerous times last season, and it was, you were seeing a kid kind of blossom into a really young star quarterback. And then he would have games, like the one against Florida, for example, where the wheels kind of fell off and he threw some untimely interceptions. One of them was called back due to penalty, and then he threw another one. So it's, he's a bit of a mixed bag on what you're getting, but if there's any qualities in the NFL draft that can be kind of ironed out, is that kind of inconsistency. Whether he'll be consistently good or bad in the NFL remains to be seen. I think it depends a lot on coaching, but luckily I don't think anybody really has him going early in the first round, and that's kind of an advantage for him. Obviously, he'll make less money in that regard, but what will help him is he'll be able to go to a team like the Steelers, maybe like the I don't know, any quarterback needy teams later in the first round that need a quarterback are usually the teams back there are kind of more contending and good at actually knowing what to do when they have their young quarterback. They're not just kind of drafting a young quarterback for like patchwork, so to speak, where they're just hoping it pans out. And lastly, with Dart, I think he's just a really good leader. He's everywhere he's gone, you know, whether it's Ole Miss or anywhere, he's consistently been kind of a galvanizing force in that locker room, and I'm really excited to see where he goes and how he does. I liked every year in the draft, I always have like my one guy at quarterback that I'm like, this is my guy. This is the guy that I believe in most. And I've been right on some years. I've been wrong on some others. You know, I had Mahomes. I loved Mahomes. Mahomes was great. 2018, I was kind of wrong. I had Josh Rosen as my guy that year. Couldn't have been more wrong there. 2019, I had Dwayne Haskins out of Ohio State. We never really got to see him live up to his full potential. Unfortunately, he passed away just a few years ago. So, you know, just to kind of provide some, 2020, it was Justin Herbert for me. So I've kind of had like a mixed bag of results in that regard. This year, my guy is Jackson Dart. I really like Jackson Dart. There's another guy coming up that I will be talking about that I also really like, almost as much as Dart, but not quite. But I really do like that player as well. But next up first, before we get to that, I want to talk about Tyler Show from Louisville. Unlike some of the guys we see on this list, you know, Dart played in the SEC, Gord played for the Miami Hurricanes, Jalen Milroe played for Alabama. You know, these are big schools. Colorado with Shedeur, not as much of a big school, but he was just such a dominant force in that school that it's a little different. Tyler Show for Louisville, you know, he didn't have that big school advantage, or rather big school like challenge, I guess is a better word. And unlike Shedeur, like I mentioned, I just don't think he's as good as Shedeur. But what he does have to his advantage is that he spent a lot of years in college. You know, he's got a lot of game time experience. The reason I like that is, you know, you see guys like coming into the league nowadays that barely started in college. Anthony Richardson barely started a full season in college. Mitch Trubisky back in 2017, I want to say started 13 games for North Carolina. So you're seeing a lot of guys go in the first round that just simply aren't ready or simply don't have enough of those game time moments under their belt. Tyler Show does. He started plenty of games for plenty of different teams in college football. However, he did not start a full-time season until 2024, so I'm interested to see if he can kind of, you know, translate all he's learned to the NFL. He's a big, strong quarterback, 6'5", 230 pounds. So one of the bigger quarterbacks in the draft. You love to see that. They're kind of a dying breed nowadays in football. You're not really nowadays seeing as much of those like super big and tall 6'6" quarterbacks like we used to, but he's one of those. He's got some decent mobility. He's got a few rushing touchdowns at Louisville, so you know, interested to see if any teams want to take a swing at him, work that into their offense. Yeah, Tyler Show, I like him. I don't love him, but I like him. Jalen Milroe, here's the other guy that I love, that I was talking about, that I love almost as much as Jackson Dart. He's an athletic freak, first and foremost. Let's get that right out of the way. I compare him a lot to Jalen Hurts. I think he's kind of a poor man's Jalen Hurts, but a poor man's anything can turn into a very successful player and no longer a poor man's Jalen Hurts. You know, if he puts in the work that I know he's capable of putting in. He's a little bit inaccurate in college. We saw that a lot, especially in some big moments last season. He could be a little bit inaccurate, a little bit kind of rushy with his mechanics, but I think that'll be ironed out. That's one of the things you can definitely coach out of a player. I think he's kind of this year's Anthony Richardson. You know, like there are a lot of these issues with his ability as a quarterback. I think a lot of teams will just be willing to kind of overlook because of how just athletic and extremely naturally gifted he is. I think a lot of teams will be willing to overlook that, much like they were, or much like the Colts were with Anthony Richardson. I think he could go anywhere from the first round to the third round. You know, I think a team could definitely take a swing on him in the first round. I wouldn't count on it. I don't think he goes in the first round, but it would not surprise me if a team believes in him to that extent. He's not a terrible decision maker. He's not a great one either. You know, in that regard, he's a lot like Jalen Hurts in that regard. You know, he doesn't quite see the field towards in the middle, kind of like the same issue Jalen Hurts has, but he can win a lot of games with Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts just won a Super Bowl. He's been in 2, you know what I mean? So definitely like Jalen Milroe a lot. And another thing, great leader of men, you know, playing at a big school like Alabama. These are NFL players, and that's how it's always been. And it's like, you know, certain colleges, and you're a good leader it's different being a good leader at, let's say, like Syracuse. We're going to talk about a Syracuse quarterback coming up. It's different between being a good leader at Syracuse, where you're the guy that's going to the NFL, and you're really not playing with many people going to the NFL. Alabama, it's almost like being in an NFL locker room. You know, these guys are going to the NFL. You're probably one of the lesser talented guys that's going to the NFL. So it's kind of like, well, why should we listen to this guy? Well, he's a good leader. So you got to be, it's just kind of a different level of challenge when it comes to being a leader at a school like Alabama compared to a smaller school. And Milroe did that in spades. The man under the helmet is maybe my favorite in the draft in general. You know, I just think as far as leadership and character goes, Jalen Milroe is a great guy. And that's important. Next up, I want to talk about Will Howard from Ohio State. And, you know, he's a national champion. They just won the title. But I would argue that at Ohio State, he kind of underperformed given his expectations. I think a lot of people expected him to kind of blossom into a true bona fide first-round pick. But we didn't really see that. You know, he had a great season stat-wise in 2024. He had 35 passing touchdowns and a few rushing touchdowns to boot. So he had a great season with stats, but the game film tells a little bit of a different story. I think, you know, you throw 35 touchdowns at Ohio State and win the national championship, but you're not a projected first rounder. That should tell you a lot of what you need to know in that regard. But he did have a very high completion percentage throughout his college career, a very high completion percentage last season in OSU's championship winning bout. And like I mentioned, he's got a lot of rushing touchdowns. You know, he's a good, big, strong runner of the football, and that's what I think a lot of these teams are looking for. But yeah, Will Howard, not going to go in the first round. I would say very confidently he's not going to be a first-round pick. But depending on the situation he falls to, could be a good option for some team. Who knows? Next up, I want to talk about Quinn Ewers out of Texas. This guy's a complete wild card. I loved him going into the season, and then I was kind of put off by some things that I saw. Just a lot to kind of... He's a very overwhelming player to watch, suffice it to say the least. You know, watching Texas, if I said that, you know, if I said earlier that Jackson Dart was inconsistent, Quinn Ewers is that to the upteenth degree. You know, he's a complete wild card. He'll make a dazzling play 1 minute. You know, he's got a strong arm, maybe the strongest arm in the draft, can throw like 75, 80 yards. He'll make dazzling plays 1 minute with that arm and just a mind-boggling decision the next. He's a mixed bag, as mixed bag as they come. And he was injured throughout last season. Maybe not so much injury history where you need to worry about it if you're drafting the guy, but I think... you know, that last season with the play that we saw not being maybe what we're looking for a first-round quarterback, and you know, when we got injured, you know, you saw Arch Manning kind of show him up, and a lot of people think that he should have just transferred instead of declaring, maybe waited a year to declare for the draft, can maybe go somewhere else like Ohio State and kind of re-elevate your stock to become a first-round pick again. He didn't do that. He's declaring for the draft. But he nearly lost that starting role to Arch earlier than expected. Arch played great during his absence, and they had a tough decision to make. They obviously ended up going with Quinn Ewers when he was healthy, but who knows what would have happened if they didn't. However, one thing I will say about Quinn Ewers, he did have a good playoffs. Texas nearly made the national championship, and I think a lot of that can be put on Ewers. Next up, I want to talk about Kyle McCord from Syracuse. He had a great year after transferring from Ohio State. You know, he transferred to Syracuse, but I think my biggest question is, where was this at Ohio State? Is he kind of a merchant of having an easier schedule and easier competition playing for Syracuse? That's a valid question. He had a little too many interceptions for me, considering who he was playing against. He threw 12 last year. And as far as mobility goes, that's my biggest concern out of any of these quarterbacks for him is him the most in that regard is he's immobile. He's like a statue. All of these quarterbacks that I've mentioned up to this point have had positive rushing yards and some touchdowns and things like that. He has had negative rushing yards all but one season of college. Those are because, whenever you get sacked in college, it counts out his rushing yards. So he's had negative rushing yards in just about every season he's had at college. And the only season where he didn't have negative rushing yards, he had 4. So he's only got 3 rushing touchdowns. So mobility is definitely a concern. You can make it work with a true pocket passer, but it's a lot rarer in the NFL nowadays, and you have to be really talented at throwing the football for that to happen. And I just don't think he has it. I think he'll make a very solid backup, but I definitely wouldn't draft him with any kind of hopes of having him be the franchise guy. 2 more quarterbacks here. I want to talk about Riley Leonard from Notre Dame. This guy's one of my favorites. I really like this kid. He's kind of like a poor man's Josh Allen. Big, strong, athletic kid, can run the hell out of the football. You really like his leadership. Incredible leader. Maybe not as good as Jalen Milroe, who's like kind of my guy in that regard, but he's very good leader, very mobile. We saw that a lot, especially in those Notre Dame playoff games. He really turned on the Jets when it mattered. He's got a lot of potential. I think he would need to go to a team kind of like the Bills. Obviously, the Bills don't need him. They have Josh Allen, but a team capable of kind of turning a player like that into a star. And I would say he was, besides their running back, he was one of the biggest reasons for Notre Dame's big run to the College Football National Championship last year. Obviously, they came up a little short. They started to mount that comeback effort off of his back, off of the team's back, and he had a great season. They came up short, but he was great. He wasn't super prolific, though. That's a criticism I have, because, obviously stats don't tell the full story. That's obvious with guys like Jalen Milroe, who didn't light it up the board when it came to stats either, but I just you got to wonder what was stopping him from really lighting up the stat sheet. I know Notre Dame's offense has always been a little bit limited, especially these last few years, but I just kind of wonder if he's got more potential than just being what he was in college, or if he'll go to the NFL and maybe be like a pretty solid, game manager kind of player. Final quarterback on the list, some guy that I've noticed I really like a lot more than a lot of people do. I think it's kind of baffling to me that he's not being considered one of the more top prospects, and that's Dylan Gabriel out of Oregon. This kid just throws and throws and throws and throws touchdown passes. He's done it every year at college. He had a long college career. He utilized the transfer portal and the red shirt and really stayed in college a long time. So my criticism earlier about some of these guys not having real game reps and game time, game moments and not having as much experience in college games, well, he's got a ton of it. He's got, he's one of the all-time college passers in Division I football in touchdown passes because of how long he's played in college football. So he's got exactly what you're looking for in that regard. He's very mobile. He's got a lot of rushing touchdowns. I think he would limit that in 2025, in the NFL, if he were starting, just because it's a different game in the NFL. We'll get into that in just a second here. I don't have questions about his character, but I have kind of a question of he's transferred multiple times, UCF to Oklahoma, now to Oregon. So you got to wonder, when the going gets tough, do the tough get going, that kind of thing. My comp for him, honestly, is he's a left-handed Bryce Young, and that's not an insult by any means. Obviously, Bryce Young did not have the earliest success in the NFL. We saw him turn it really around last season and earn, honestly, a spot as the starting quarterback once again next year, when a lot of people think he was going to be shown the door. He really turned on the Jets. But in college specifically, I'm talking, he's a left-handed Bryce Young, and that's, he's accurate. He's got a decent but not super great arm, but he can make up with that with his athleticism and his accuracy. My biggest concern, and another reason why I'm comparing him to Bryce Young, I'm just a little concerned with his size. He's a little bit of a tiny guy, and that's tough. You guys like Russell Wilson and guys like we've seen, be able to kind of overcome size issues like that are really special in one regard. You know, Kyler Murray, one of the fastest quarterbacks we've ever seen. Russell Wilson can throw an extremely accurate football and very athletic. Dylan Gabriel, I don't really have as much of those traits that I love like I do with Russell Wilson and Kyler Murray, so that's my big concern, is he big enough to be an NFL starting quarterback and talented enough to overcome his size. That being said, I do really wonder why he's not being talked about more seriously among the top prospects. He's got a lot of what teams in the modern NFL would want. You know, I know he's left-handed, which it feels like left-handed quarterbacks are always at a disadvantage. You know, there's only so many of them in the NFL, but he can overcome that. He's overcome a lot in his college career, nearly won the Heisman last year, so I really do think he should be talked about more highly, maybe even as a first rounder. I think he might go in the second. I think a team might take a swing at him. And if we're talking teams that may take a swing at him, why not the Rams? Rams, you know, you got Matthew Stafford, who's only got so many years left. I think that, you know, with their offense and what they're trying to do and the way Sean McVay is as a coach, I think the Los Angeles Rams would be a perfect landing spot for him. So I'm hoping that we see him go to a team like the Rams, who is willing to kind of invest in him to be potentially a successor to Matthew Stafford. Obviously, Stafford, you know, one of the better quarterbacks to ever play this game. You know, he'd be a hard guy to replace, but I think they should look at a guy like Dylan Gabriel as a potential replacement. So yeah, those are the 10 quarterbacks I wanted to talk about today. There's obviously a few others that I really, really like in this draft, but these top 10 I think are kind of a cut above the rest. You know, you got the guy from Indiana that I really like, but I think these guys here, these 10, are the real cream of the crop. So that's been our show today. We got the NFL draft coming up tomorrow, and I'm excited. I think everybody's really excited to see who goes where, if we see some big reaches. You know, I personally, in my mock drafts, have 3 quarterbacks going in the first round, that being Ward, Sanders, and Dart. But it would not surprise me to see more than 3 go in the first round. Teams need them. It always seems like in the draft, when a lot of teams need good quarterbacks, there's not many good quarterbacks in the draft, and when no teams need quarterbacks, there's always a surplus of them in the draft. So this is no different. We're seeing a lot of quarterback-needy teams probably not going to be able to get a quarterback in this draft. So we'll see where it all pans out. The NFL draft is coming up tomorrow. Runs from the first round being tomorrow, Thursday, second and third round Friday, 4 through 7 on Saturday. So I'm very excited for the draft. I hope you guys are too. This has been Off Your Gord today on this beautiful Wednesday afternoon, April the 23rd. This has been the show. I'm Jeffrey Gordon. I'm your host. I'll see you next week. We're going to be talking about the draft afterwards. You know, what happened, what surprised us. We're going to be talking about some other things. It's going to be great. Hope to see you then. This has been the show. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time.